Hello to my little friend. We all know the scene from the 1983 classic Scarface as Tony Montana, portrayed by Al Pacino, blows down the doors and mows everyone down. Hollywood paints a vivid picture of how brutal and violent gangsters can be, but I'm here today to tell you about the real Scarface, Al Capone, one of the most infamous gangsters of the Prohibition era, whose legacy has left a lasting impact on the world of organized crime to this day. Alphonse Capone, born January 17, 1899 to Nepalese immigrant family, grew up in the Navy District of New York City. The streets were rough and Al had to fight to survive. Leading a gang of hoodlums from the young age of 10, Alphonse became to resemble the man he would become. With a mix of brutality and generosity, Capone gained the respect of those around him throughout his teenage life. Working as a bouncer at a bar called the Harvard Inn out of Coney Island, Capone got his first real taste of gangster life when his advances on a young lady were met by the disdain of a scorned brother who wanted to defend his sister's honor. When he attempted to approach the girl and give her a compliment, Frank Galluccio attacked Capone with a knife, leaving a large scar on the left side of his face, giving him the hated nickname to this day, Scarface. Embarrassed by the scars, Capone did everything he could to hide them, using makeup and powder or requesting only to be photographed from the right side of his face. Seeking to get away from the life he had created for himself in the Big Apple, Capone made his way to Chicago, where he caught the attention of crime lord and soon-to-be mentor Johnny Torrio. Under Torrio's wing, Al Capone soared through the ranks of the Colosimo mob and eventually became Torrio's right-hand man. In the height of alcohol prohibition, Capone and Torrio united the gangs of Chicago and made a large fortune for themselves off of illegal activities such as gambling, alcohol, and prostitution. But they couldn't escape the law forever. Eventually, Torrio was arrested and sentenced to several years in federal prison. From his cell, Torrio resigned from organized crime and left his empire to Capone at the young age of 26. Now in charge of the largest gang in America, Capone continued to orchestrate illegal dealings throughout Chicago. He was willing to pay off anyone that was willing to help him and kill anyone that stood in his way. Capone ruled the city with an iron fist. Expanding his kingdom into the suburbs of Chicago, Capone had become one of the most powerful men in America. But fate would turn on him one day. As he was leaving a theater one night, him and his men were arrested for carrying concealed weapons. The judge and jury had no chance of getting him off this time. He couldn't pay anyone off. They knew the man that stood before him as the violent criminal he was orchestrating such dealings as the Valentine's Day Massacre, and he was sentenced to a year in jail. In his absence, Capone's organization had become the target of the federal government. His brother Ralph and several of his top lieutenants were arrested and imprisoned for tax evasion. And over a 5-year investigation, the IRS was able to accumulate enough evidence against Capone himself to indict him with 22 charges of tax evasion and sentenced him to 11 years in federal prison. To this day, that is the longest sentence ever given to a criminal for tax evasion. Most of his time in prison was spent at Alcatraz, also known as the Rock, where he developed the early symptoms of syphilis, picked up from his lusty lifestyle from one of his girlfriends. Capone's mind began to degrade with the syphilis, and he spent the last few years of his life after prison in his house in Florida with his wife May, eventually dying of cardiac arrest in 1947 at the age of 48. Capone's life as the godfather of organized crime was over, but his legacy had shaped the way organized crime is done today, and he has left a permanent scar on the face of Chicago.